hello all. We're discussing performance management today, but this is specifically in relation to how to implement a performance management system. So we're going to dive into more of that performance management ecosystem, where to start, and of course, how we can use software to supplement this process. So in doing so, I'm gonna make one of my core focuses today around some of the common mistakes, or as I call them, myths, that we often see circulating around these implementations that often cause us to fail. And in drawing on these, we can then actually learn from these past failures or mistakes or things that we see happening around us in order to set ourselves up for success if this is something that we're looking to do within our own organizations. But before we do begin, let me introduce myself. My name is Libby Stewart. I'm Head of Professional Services and Research at Seven Geese. So Seven Geese are a HR software company that actually specialize in continuous performance management and talent growth. So as you can imagine, we have a wealth of experience in implementing performance management systems. And we do this around the globe for a huge variety of clients. They're large, they're small, they're in hypergrowth, sometimes they're scaling up, sometimes they're scaling down, and they're across industries as well. So we've really seen it all. In terms of myself, I'm an evidence-based practitioner with a background in business psychology, and I've had about 10 years of experience in talent management functions. These span sort of organizational development, leadership development, board advisory, and of course now I specialize in the performance management space. Prior to working in corporate, I worked extensively in research projects spanning social, business, and cognitive psychology, just to name a few. And for those of you who might be unaware of what business or organizational psychologists actually do, we specialize in what we call the science of people at work. So we really focus on how humans sort of best operate within the workplace, how our brains best absorb and take in information, and what environments actually bring out the best in people within the workplace. So in my work with Seven Geese, I'm lucky enough to partner with all of our clients globally to assist them in driving stronger performance cultures. And obviously why I'm here today to talk about my experience in partnering with a huge variety of companies that have really stepped up to the challenge of implementing a performance management system. So just to give you a little bit more context, I mentioned that Seven Geese is a HR software company, but I really want to sort of delve in today to what continuous performance management actually is and what I actually mean when I say continuous performance management software, because there are different offerings out there and different understandings of what continuous performance management actually is. So I want to give you a little bit of context first. So what we do specifically at Seven Geese with our platform is we focus on baking all of the research that we know about human motivation and performance, and we bake all of that into our product with specific features such as strategic goal setting, one-on-ones that leaders can have with their direct reports and team members, feedback in various forms. So that could be your engagement surveys, or it could be a 360 feedback, or even an informal feedback, values-based recognition. We also have data-driven performance reviews that actually ties all of this together so that you're able to have a data-tracked review from time to time. And more recently, we've looked into people analytics and released a feature around this to help you with succession planning and managing your talent, as well as a career growth function to help you focus on that talent growth, that piece that we know keeps people and helps them sort of elicit their best performance when they're working with us. So essentially everything that we do focuses on nudging human performance through technology. And we do that by drawing on all those factors that we know intrinsically and extrinsically actually tap into human motivation. In essence, we're just trying to make it easier for workplaces to engage in these activities that we know are good for us and that are good for our people as well, and that can really enhance that employee experience. So today, when I'm talking about tech support and when I'm talking about our experiences in terms of implementation, these are the kinds of performance management software systems that I'm actually referring to, and this is the kind of work that we do with our clients. So look, in terms of actually jumping into the discussion points today, and this is in no particular order at all, there's a lot that we can actually talk about, and we've only got 50 minutes. We do have a little bit of time at the end for some questions. Hopefully we'll be able to get to them. But as Rhonda mentioned earlier, please feel free to populate that Q&A section. And if we don't have time today, we're going to do our best to follow up with you and make sure that we can provide some resources and support around your specific questions. So first, in terms of what we're going to touch on, let's revisit what is performance management? What has the journey been for performance management? And why has it been so difficult for organizations and companies to get this right? Then we're going to talk through some common mistakes we see companies making when attempting to implement performance management. And out of these, I've kind of picked 3 really broad areas to touch on, and I'm not going to touch on these in any particular order. These are just going to be discussion points that emerge throughout. I could talk about this for hours. But one of the pieces I really want to touch on here is how we use technology to support your performance culture. And I often refer to this mistake as just buy some software and throw it at it. These kinds of superficial solutions, we know, don't work. We need to make sure that we're partnering our technology and these systems that we're using to nudge these behaviors. We need to make sure that we're actually using these pieces in conjunction with some actual processes and behavioral changes. So basically what we need to do is make sure that we're using technology at the right time. One of the other pieces we're going to look at as well is you're actually looking at shifting performance culture. So I often see organizations coming in and saying, yeah, we're just going to do a performance review. We're going to amend that performance review. We're just going to have a look at our compensation processes. We're just going to do X, Y, Z, all of these different disparate pieces. What we need to understand is that actually what we're doing when we implement any kind of system is we're creating a performance culture shift. And as we all know, when we're developing new habits and new norms, these mean all kinds of things for human behavior. So the myth that I see popping up around here is, our people are super smart. They're just going to figure it out on their own. We're just going to throw something new at them. They'll figure it out. Basically, I see this happen a lot actually more recently these days as we sort of shift away from, chasing people down and making them sort of, tick and flick the boxes and do those compliance activities. And we're trying to foster more empowerment and ownership. However, some of the issues that pop up with that is the fact that how do we still drive accountability and how do we shift that culture? So we still need a structure and a proactive implementation approach, but how do we actually do this? And finally, the last piece is forgetting that it's an ecosystem. So this is where I see people going, okay, let's just get people executing. We're just going to focus on goals. Goals is all we care about when it comes to performance management. We don't need any of that other fluffy stuff like recognition, values, and feedback. That doesn't work for us. Well, this idea is fantastic if you think that you just want to execute, but we actually know when it comes to the science of human performance and motivation that we actually do need to set up some of these fundamental elements that human beings thrive off in order to perform. So the idea that performance is just a one-off event, it's just one piece such as goal setting and nothing else is not true. And this is a myth that's often perpetuated. And we need to understand that there's a whole ecosystem that we need to put in place to support achievement of goals. And we want to talk a little bit about that as well. We're then going to summarize our recommendations for getting your performance management system right. And I'm going to walk through some frequently asked questions that I get from our clients and customers all of the time, as well as try and address your audience questions along the way. As I mentioned, this topic is huge. So today I'm really trying to do a little bit of a drive-by in a lot of areas, and I'm hoping it will sort of spark some ideas for you if you're thinking about doing this yourselves. We won't necessarily have enough time to dive into a lot of detail around certain areas. So if you are interested, again, just let us know. So what's the big deal with performance management? I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the journey of performance management, at least from my perspective, where it has been, where it is now, and what a good performance management system actually looks like. I think this is really crucial because we have a lot of different definitions of what this might be. So if we actually look at modern performance management or continuous performance management, I don't actually think I need to convince anybody here today that is listening about the drastic evolution we've seen in relation to performance management over the last 20 years or so. But let's recap anyway. So when we think about the traditional approach to performance management, this is best thought of as a once-a-year appraisal, that evaluation process, typically just used to make decisions around promotion, pay, succession planning, whatever it may be. Now, the idea behind this, or the logic behind this, is that we're supposed to be assessing the value of an employee's contributions to the business over a period of time. We're supposed to be providing an organization with objective data to inform decisions around their talent. And ideally, we're providing feedback for an employee in order for them to know how to improve their performance, to stay motivated and engaged. So at the end of the day, when we think about the core purpose and what we're supposed to be doing with performance management, we're supposed to be driving and nudging future performance for those individuals. However, I think we all know that the system was broken, right? The reality of the situation was far from this. We know that the once a year evaluation with no formal data tracking over time means that they're actually really rife with bias, and they're extremely unreliable measures of performance. They're not reliable at all. Our evaluation criteria, so the thing that we're actually measuring people on, is often biased to begin with. Is this what we should be measuring people on? Is this reinforcing the actual behavior that we need them to see? And the accuracy of the tracking of their success over the year. This is rife with bias. You know, it could be that the most recent project they did stands out the most in our mind. Maybe that project was a failure. Maybe that project was a success. Perhaps we're rewarding people that we see around the office all the time that are, you know, sort of there really early and staying really late, rewarding presenteeism as opposed to productivity. Are they still hitting their outcomes? These are the kinds of biases that we see emerge when it comes to the once a year performance evaluation. Not to mention, it doesn't actually mean a lot to people. So over the past few years, we've seen an overwhelming amount of research. Obviously, as an evidence-based practitioner, I always like to look at the research. And the research actually shows us, I mean, there's been some great reviews actually from the Center of Evidence-Based Management, which I can't recommend enough if you are interested in delving into this a bit further. But they actually look at the entire performance management process, and they pinpoint all the different areas in which the traditional approach really goes wrong. But one of the things they actually factor in, and one of the things they actually highlight through their evidence assessments, is the one factor that we don't take into account more often than not is the employee reaction in the process. So that employee experience of the performance management process. This is actually the most important piece because it's the employee reaction that counts. After they have that initial interaction, if it is a review or a conversation, you know, are they skipping down the hallway going, I know exactly what I need to do over the next year or the next quarter or the next few weeks to get better at what I do? And when we actually think about this and we think about our experiences, and I, you know, challenge you to go out there and ask most people how they feel about a performance appraisal, you know, I guarantee you the sentiment isn't that positive. If you find somebody that, you know, is feeling a little bit positive, they're probably, you know, 1 in a million. And the research actually captures this as well. So at the end of the day, when we're thinking about all of this, we're going, well, you know, if we're not factoring in these reactions and if people aren't having these positive experiences, we're actually missing the end goal. And the end goal is the fact that we're not driving future performance with these processes. At the end of the day, we're not really doing much at all. So even if it isn't a negative process, it's certainly not necessarily a positive one. And at least the research tells us that much. So look, you know, I don't need to tell you this, but, you know, the recent HBR articles, they, you know, they make sense to us. They tell us about comprehensive analyses of studies. I think there was one of 607 studies showing that more than a third of all of those feedback interventions that they have in relation to people's performance actually backfire, decreasing performance instead of increasing it. So there's plenty of support to say, actually, the system is broken. We need to fix this. So look, the industry cottoned on to this. It forced us to rethink the performance management process. And we saw a move toward what we call the continuous performance management approach. So we saw companies like Deloitte and other organizations moving toward this continuous conversation approach, which is fantastic. More touch points with our managers, more opportunities to have these conversations. However, over time, what we also found was something was still missing. And as much as this made sense, people still needed to see a measurable sense of progress, and we still needed data as a company, objective data, to make talent decisions around. So we saw the pendulum swing entirely the other way and realized something was missing. And what we've seen now is the pendulum landing somewhere in the middle, where we need to continuously have these ongoing motivational performance management activities happening, but we also need to supplement these from time to time with a data-driven review kind of process so people can evaluate how they're going. Human beings love to know where they stand. They can figure out how much progress they've made and get that sense of achievement and know exactly where it is that they need to go next. So in terms of that kind of summary, this is really what I'm talking about when I talk about continuous performance management. This is where we've landed today. This is that continuous approach that we really need to focus on. So when we're thinking about the business case for performance management, this is the piece where I find a lot of companies are going, okay, we get that it's important. I'm a talent management professional. I know that performance management actually matters. But what is the actual business case? Well, we know the traditional approach often doesn't work. It does a lot of damage. And even if we don't do any damage, we're actually, are we actually improving performance? So if that's the case, then actually this manual process is costing us a lot of money and time for something that's not actually achieving the end goal that we set out to achieve in the first place. We also know that most organizations now are actually focusing on employee experience as they should be. And employee experience is becoming, a huge area that we're investing in. Employee engagement used to be something that we really used to focus on, and now we're getting bigger. We're zooming out. We're looking at the entire employee experience. And this is something I recommend all organizations start looking into. In fact, employee experience is such a key driver of so many amazing organizational outcomes. And I think performance management is one of the key areas we really need to start reevaluating when it comes to the employee experience, because it's kind of well known as one of the most horrible processes people typically go through. Certainly is anxiety inducing for many people that I talk to. So look, an example around the amazing outcomes we see with employee experience, if you are building a business case, there's a report by WorkHuman and IBM. They did a huge analysis of organizations and measured their employee experience using a scale that they'd formulated. And they collected employee data from Work Trend survey of over 22,000 workers across 45 countries and territories. They did a cross-section of industries, thousands of different organizations and different job families. And out of this, they identified 600 respondents from about 113 different organizations. They then collected financial data from those same 113 organizations, pulling things from Yahoo Finance, Google Finance, companies' annual reports that were published. And they actually correlated these trends, and they conducted international surveys, with HR practitioners as well. And what they actually found was that organizations that scored in the top 25% on the employee experience report had nearly 3 times the return on assets compared to organizations in the bottom quartile. Organizations in the top 25% again as well also reported double the return on sales compared to organizations in the bottom quartile. And no surprises here, across the board in their report, they concluded that there's actually significant room for all organizations to improve their practices to drive a more positive employee experience. And ultimately, this will maximize business performance. So this is a real business case here to enhance employee experience, and specifically through the performance management process as well, because this is the means by which people are understanding, how they're going within their organizations, and how they're going to grow and get better within them as well. So it's absolutely essential that we start focusing on this. In addition, we see a lot of organizations as well talking about, execution. I hear the word execution. We need to be better executors. It's great to have ideas, but we need to execute. And when we look at articles, we see them popping up all the time. We've got the MIT management articles, and they claim that there's lots of estimates out there, but they claim over 90% of organizations do not actually execute on their strategy. There's other studies where over half of the executive team that actually created the strategy have difficulty recalling it by their own admission. And by the time this reaches the front line, only about 14% of employees really know what their strategy is, let alone how their day-to-day work connects to that strategy. So really, when we sort of boil it right down, this is the business case for performance management. We really need to connect people's day-to-day to the strategy of the organization so that we really understand how are we executing on this strategy. It's pretty scary if we think just 90%, that means only 10% of organizations are actually executing. That's kind of scary. So this is why, there's a real need and a cry out for performance management to be a core focus. So we keep talking about this, but specifically, let's get concrete here. What does continuous performance management actually look like? And what does it look like when we look at it from a science and evidence-based perspective? Well, let's get concrete. We could spend years on this topic, so I'm just going to forget the labels and we're going to focus on 3 things that work. So we look here, obviously, at all of the research around motivation and performance, and we boil it all down into these factors. The first piece, as you can see there, is the science of goal setting. So it's science-backed goal setting. I don't care what approach companies use. I don't care if you're into objectives and key results, if you're into Rockefeller habits, whatever formulation you use for your goal setting, just make sure you stick to the principles of science and you make sure it works for your organization and your people. This is the cornerstone of your performance management system. People need to have clear expectations around what they need to do in order to be successful, and it needs to be connected to the purpose and the goals of the organization. The goals themselves, if we're looking at the science-backed piece, they need to be qualitative and aspirational goals. They need to make people really excited and connected to the work that they're doing. But they also need to be supported by quantitative milestones that tangibly connect them to that purpose and let them know they're making an impact on the company progress overall. So at 7Geese, we often use the methodology called OKRs. You may have heard of these before. Google have quite famously adopted these, and they capture this framework really nicely. However, like I said, I'm goal agnostic. Whatever approach you use, just make sure you stick to the science and you make sure that you have those quantitative milestones in there so people can really evaluate their work as well. So what does this do? It connects people to the meaningfulness of the work that they do. And we know purpose connection is one of those challenging things that organizations are looking to do. We see a lot of organizations posting purpose all over the walls, but do people know what that actually means in their day-to-day work? And this is what a good goal setting approach will show them how to do. I think the classic example here is, I've rarely met an accountant that goes to work because they love spreadsheets. I just love spreadsheets. I'm going to work on spreadsheets all day. Spreadsheets are my passion. Rarely do I ever hear that. We have an accountant going to organizations because they believe in what the organization is doing. If it's an adventure sports organization, they've gone to that organization because they love adventure, because they identify in some way with that organization and they want to make an impact and take adventure to the world. We just need to connect that day-to-day, that adventure, that mission that they have. How are you furthering that mission of the organization with their day-to-day? Bring them out of the spreadsheets. It's very much the same as the janitor that worked at NASA. When they asked him, what is it that you do for a living? He never said, I clean up the washrooms. He turned around and said, I send people into space. This is what we're going for when we're talking about a goal setting approach. And there are approaches out there that will tap into this. We just need to be really strategic and really focus on incorporating the science into this. People also have basic needs around goal setting for what we call autonomy and empowerment. Of course, we hear these words time and time again, but they need to have this in the goals that they create and the decisions that they make that are relevant to the work that we do. So we have a saying that we use at 7Geese all the time, which is nobody washes a rental car. You give someone a goal, are they going to own it? Not if they don't own the goal. They need to come up with that goal themselves. Let them make those goals and let them see the difference. And you might have to coach and nudge and facilitate that process, but really taking the time to help them understand ownership and to see the progress against those goals as well. The second piece is transparency with progress. So people need to see regular and frequent progress toward their goals, and they need to experience growth by being challenged and stretched. How we do this is by regular, frequent measures of progress because they're motivating and they keep us on track. Hence the continuous piece. This is why continuous performance management is continuous. We need to keep our eye on the prize. It has to be. So if we think about it, if you have an exam in 12 months' time, when do you study for it? Maybe if you're really conscientious, you'll do it every month. But the majority of people are going to come back and maybe they study in the last month, maybe the last week, maybe the night before. Humans aren't great at long-term thinking. We really need to break it down into manageable chunks and figure out what our milestones are along the way to make sure that we are on track. This is why there's such a shift. Even if we look at things like, your Fitbit devices and your Garmin devices, all of these fitness trackers, the reason why this works is because they're giving ongoing feedback to us about how we're going against our goals. In fact, they've had heaps of studies around these fitness activity trackers, and they've compared Fitbit users to those that don't use the Fitbit over a 12-week time period. After 12 weeks, those that actually used the Fitbit had 43% more steps than the non-Fitbit users. After 12 weeks, they were also up 30 to 40% more active. These are the tiny things that we know actually nudge and elevate human performance. So with these goals, we can't just be setting and forgetting these goals over a 1-year period and just coming back every review. This is why we always recommend setting quarterly goals as an individual or as a team and making sure you have frequent check-ins to those goals. So that would be weekly or bi-weekly, and many conversations around any roadblocks that you're having with your leaders and supporting systems. So like I said, human beings aren't long-term thinkers, and we need to make sure that we have a lot of transparency in our progress. We need to understand how we're going against those goals. Finally, we need an ecosystem. We need to support goal attainment with an ecosystem. We need fuel in the tank. So to do this, what do I mean by an ecosystem? I mean things like timely, regular feedback about the effort being given by somebody, receiving recognition for their efforts, for their wins, for their outcomes, and even for those attempts where perhaps maybe they failed, but they were on the right track and we learned something amazing from it. We really need to start rewarding the behavior that we want to see within our organization and having continual conversations to reinforce that. In particular, however, we need to focus on also removing roadblocks towards people's progression. And this is something that we see doesn't happen enough. So providing support for people around that goal attainment and making sure they're feeling supported along the way. What this does is it helps people actually achieve more, they feel better, but what's in it for you is the fact that people are actually executing, they're stretching themselves and they're challenging themselves. So it really is a win-win situation. So when we're talking about continuous performance management specifically, these are the pieces that we really need to focus on. One of the analogies I think that actually really works quite nicely, and this is something that I talk to people about all the time, is that, you know, having a great goal is like having a beautiful car. It's like having a wonderful Ferrari or something like this, something capable of going a great distance, and it looks fantastic, but it's also functional. You know, this is capable of going somewhere. What an organization needs to do is provide that beautiful stretch of road, the direction. Where is it that we're going? How do you know when you've arrived at your destination? Here's an idea. Here are some potential pathways. You know, here's a beautiful smooth patch of road as well. I'm not going to make you ride on a dirt track because you're a Ferrari. You know, how is the Ferrari going to go an extra mile on a dirt track? But what we need to remember here is that we also need to put fuel in the tank. And fuel in the tank are all of those little pieces that we know human beings at a base level really need. And that's regular bi-weekly feedback. That's making sure they're recognized for their efforts. It's making sure that they have regular indications of, are you on the right track? Did you make it so many miles? You know, where are you at this point in time? And so this is how we kind of position it in terms of everything within your performance ecosystem driving that goal attainment. We represent this obviously in our platform as well. Just for those that prefer sort of a more concrete visual, you can see that the continuous piece around that cog there are your objectives, your one-on-ones, your recognition, and your feedback. These then all feed into regular reviews. So you're using all of that data. So it's data-driven, overcoming all those biases from the past, because it's actually based on stuff that you've tracked over time. Having a review to reflect on your work and making that growth-oriented. And then the company using that information to drive career management and career growth and help you achieve your goals on a more personal level as well. And also using that information for your people analytics. So who's in the pipeline for promotion? Who's the next person that we really should be thinking about? Perhaps somebody wants to make a diagonal leap into a different function. How can we make that happen? So actually letting people know we're not just having these continuous conversations, guys. These are actually going somewhere, and we're actually going to feed this into our strategy around you and make our core decisions around that as well. So look, in a nutshell, a good performance management system, you know, it's an ecosystem for performance. It actually comprises of a range of factors to drive strong goal achievement, to give people that sense of progress, direction, and purpose. It's continuous and it's ongoing. It is not a once a year activity. And yes, we can support this with technology. However, it is not a separate performance management platform alone. And this is something I haven't touched on too much yet, but will go into, is that in my experience, I have many clients and companies coming to us at the point of their performance management journey when they're looking for a technology solution. However, sometimes they haven't even thought about what this whole ecosystem actually looks like and what the end goal is. And they think the technology is going to fix that for them. So more often than not, we really need to start building the plane as we fly, in essence, because we've got to have these foundational processes in place, and we've got to figure out what's going to work with your company culture before we just go throwing technology at it. We don't want to demotivate our people. We want to make this work. So this is what I mean when I say things like a good performance management ecosystem. I'm hoping that's super clear to everybody right now. So look, we all know what a good system is. We all know that it's super important. So why don't we all just go ahead and do it then? We know there's research out there. We've been talking about this for years. Why don't we just go ahead and do it? Well, I did a quick Google myself before doing this presentation today, and I literally wrote in why performance management systems, and I left it. And look at the options that came up. First and foremost, I can't disagree. They are necessary in that first option, but look at the second one there, why they fail. Now, this is something that comes up time and time again. Why do they fail? You know, it couldn't echo my sentiments enough. There's often a reason when we're looking at very complex things like human beings and performance and culture. Where did this agenda come from today? Well, I was looking at this search option. I went, oh my goodness, like this is obviously something that everybody is struggling with. And I certainly see this in my day-to-day. So why do they fail? Myriads and myriads of reasons. I've tried my best to capture as many that I can think of. And this is what I came up with in 5 minutes, talking to colleagues and clients. I'm sure that you could probably add 50 more to the list as to why implementing these systems often fail. But let's quickly talk through some of the common ones. Look, the first one, no one knows why we're doing it. Why are we changing to a continuous approach? Why are we even doing the once-a-year approach? Why are we doing this in the first place? Isn't this just another fluffy, unfair, biased approach to telling me that I'm not getting a pay rise, right? So there's a limited understanding. No one understands why, what, when, where, and how. People don't understand perhaps the need to change. Perhaps they don't know what was wrong with the old system, or perhaps, it really didn't mean that much to them in the first place, so they couldn't possibly understand how it could mean something to them now. Here's a common one, is that no one knows how to execute the change that you're asking. So, hey, everybody, we're deciding to reinvigorate and elevate our performance culture here at Organization X. So what we want you to do is, start setting better goals. Well, we all know that that's a challenge. We need to build the capability to execute the change. We need to manage expectations around that. We need to give them bite-sized pieces. This isn't a mindset that every, person in an organization will understand. So we really need to give people the time and the space and the training and the resources to understand what it is we're actually asking them to do, both as an individual, as a team, and as a collective company overall. Oftentimes, I also see, and I was talking about employee experience before, but the process itself often serves the needs of the company over the needs of the people. So oftentimes, and this is one of the problems I've seen with traditional reviews, is we need data to make compensation decisions. We don't care how awful the process is. I need people on my norm curve, and I need to know where they sit right now. Now, if we risk demotivating people through that process of ranking and rating and the awful process of a manager sitting down and having a really arbitrary conversation that means nothing to both the individual and the manager, tick and flick activity, you're giving people pay rises, but you're not actually prompting performance. Or, perhaps these are being divvied out unfairly, and you're actually risking future performance. You're not actually motivating that future performance. So really managing that tension, because of course we need this data, but we need to make sure that we are serving both the needs of the individual and the needs of the company. And we need to make our processes more people-centric overall to enhance that employee experience. And guess what? Like I said earlier, that's going to maximize our business outcomes. So it is actually in our best interests. I often see a flavor of the month approach to implementation. So it's culture 1 week, OKRs the next week, feedback next week, whatever other cultural initiative, diversity this week. People see us picking up these initiatives all the time, and they see the initiatives being dropped all the time. Now, they may be for different reasons, but one of the mentalities we really try to set here when you're looking at a performance management system is, this isn't a project that ends. You're going to do a kickoff, absolutely, and you're going to put more invested effort for a period of time, just like a project, and you should use those project management principles. But it shouldn't finish at that point. We need to keep iterating, keep evolving, and keep up that continuous piece, because we still need a character chase, even in terms of our implementation. So we need to make sure that we're shifting away from that mindset, because if we have that mindset to begin with, we're really not going to go anywhere with our system. I've mentioned this already, superficial attempts. So let's just throw tech at it. Let's say that we're going to do it, but there's really no true commitment to it. We've talked about the once-a-year appraisal. I think number 8 is really important. We need to link this to something real, something tangible. So as often as possible, we don't want to make our performance management system sit off to the side. And I see this happening all the time, that we create all these things and we don't build them within an ecosystem. We do them one-off initiatives here, there, and everywhere. We need to make sure that our compensation strategy, our total reward strategy, our company culture, our performance management process, our growth processes, they need to be, in essence, communicating the same things, reinforcing the same behaviors, reinforcing what it is that you want to see them doing. And if you haven't taken the time or effort to link these together, people see a performance management system then as a nice to have or a little bit of cream on top. They don't actually see how important it is. They don't understand that it's linked to anything. And most importantly, from an individual level, if you don't link these continuous conversations to anything real, like a career growth plan or any kind of incentive to perform, why on earth would I spend extra time and effort stretching and challenging myself if this really, at the end of the day, isn't going to benefit me, my career, or I can't even see the benefit for my organization? So really making sure that we don't position this just as a nice to have, and making sure that we try and link this with pieces that are tangible. We can talk a bit about this in a minute. And finally, one of the most important pieces is, yeah, you're telling me to do this, but I can't see any of our executive team doing it. Why on earth should I be doing it if they're not doing it at all? And I'm sure that there are many, many more, and I'm sure that you can relate to many of these. So look, I'm going to do a summary before I dive into specifically some concrete strategies we can do at every level. But this, in terms of my own experience, and I'm sure that there are many other key factors out there, in terms of my experience, this is what I've seen work, right? So the first piece is we need to recognize that when we're going to overhaul our performance management process, when we're going to look at elevating that process, when we're looking at iterating that process, whatever it is that we're doing when it comes to performance management implementation, we need to recognize, first and foremost, proactively recognize this is change management. It's change management 101, and we need to incorporate those people side of change factors. We also need to incorporate project management principles because we need structure, we need milestones, we need to understand where it is we're going, and people need an idea of parameters. They need to know where they're going to get resources from. We need to think this through proactively. And if we apply some of the key principles, I'm not saying we have to do it all, but if we apply some of the key principles from these pieces, we can actually apply these to implementing and sustaining momentum with your performance management structure. And when I've seen companies do this, the success rates are phenomenal. The other piece, and I've mentioned this, but understand from the outset, you're building an ecosystem. You're not building that one-off appraisal. You're not just building a goal-setting approach. You're also building the whole ecosystem and connecting it to existing pieces within your ecosystem. It's not one separate initiative. And we can build this one thing at a time and start layering it upon it, but make sure that we've got that future state in mind. This is not just goal setting. This is not just execution. This is not just a review. We're building a whole ecosystem of performance here. And so obviously we're doing this over time. It's a big piece of our culture. Again, I've mentioned this, I'm going to hammer it home, making sure that we're linking it to other pieces anchored in your culture and systems. I can't give you a plug and play manuscript. I can't give you the plug and play manual. You need to make sure that you're incorporating all of those cultural systems, habits, norms, every channels, anything that you're already doing needs to be incorporated into this process. One piece is technology is that supporting mechanism. Focus on getting the people, the processes, and the programs right first. These are the pieces we need to look at. And so if you've got these, in line first, and we can build some of these in parallel, that's absolutely fine. But we need to make sure that we've considered these factors and we're not relying on the technology to fix the problem for us. I'll go back to that Fitbit analogy. You don't throw a Garmin or a Fitbit or a fitness activity tracker at somebody, tap your watch in 3 months' time and say, actually, I don't understand why you're not more fit or why you haven't lost weight. The Fitbit isn't what drives the performance. The behavioral change is what drives the performance, and the Fitbit will help you elevate that. And that's the role of technology in this system. Finally, we need to make it people-centric. So everything that you design and do, make sure that at the center of it all is your people, and making sure that that employee experience is key in this process. So let's dive into that first piece around change, because building this ecosystem requires effort, it requires change, and we all know change isn't necessarily that easy. So I don't think I need to define this too much for anybody, but what I want to do is just make sure that people understand this is a change management process. Because change management, like as we see in this definition here from the ProSci Change Management Institute, is that change management focuses on how to help employees embrace, adopt, and utilize a change in their day-to-day work. Performance management is a massive change to people's day-to-day work. It's a change because it's a process and implementing it, but you're building a competency in people's ability to be agile and continually adapt to change. Performance management is doing something similar. So when we think about it and we're looking at this performance management process, what are the changes that we're asking people to do specifically? What are the changes that we need to address? We're changing their day-to-day from just task management to being strategic, long-term, purpose-driven, and applying this to their goal-setting activities. We're actually not wired to do this naturally. This is a huge shift in mindset. So when we're asking people to shift to a strategic goal-setting approach, we're actually asking them to shift away from the I'm busy staying busy approach, which is our default setting as human beings. I'm going through my task list. I made this task list. I said I'd do 100 demos. I'm going to do 100 demos. I said I'd, upload a new webinar. I'm going to upload that new webinar, et cetera, et cetera. We're shifting people away from that, just going through your activity checklist, and we're setting strategic goals that go, okay, but are these activities actually furthering the company mission, vision, values, and purpose? Is this activity that you're about to undertake actually impacting the outcomes that you want to achieve? So for example, if something on my activity list is I'm going to host 100 demos, are those demos of our software actually converting to sales? Or every quarter, every year, do I just tick off that activity and go through the motions? What I really should be looking at and measuring myself against is my conversion. Am I converting them? What activities am I looking to convert them? If those demos aren't converting anybody, should I be doing a different activity? Have I iterated? Have I changed? Do I need to set different goals? So what we're trying to do here is get us thinking more strategically, getting us evaluating the activities we're doing on a daily basis, because the whole idea here is to try and get people busy doing the right work, not busy for the sake of keeping busy. And this is where that science-backed goal setting piece can come into the mix. But to do this requires a huge shift in our ability to allocate our work, to prioritize our work, to set our goals at the beginning of every quarter, for leaders to facilitate those goals, and for companies to give people direction around those goals as well. So again, we have to think about this. This is actually a huge change that we're asking people to undertake, and obviously requires a change management approach. But then let's throw technology into the mix. People are already talking every day about their bloated tech stack, and now we're adding more tools into it. And they're probably turning around and saying, okay, well, I've already got enough tools in my tech stack. I'm already using 55 different forms of software. And now you're asking me to use another one, which in my mind, I don't really understand what the difference is between this and my task management software, because perhaps their mindset hasn't caught up to that yet. How do we then help them with their workflows? So you can see we're actually asking people to facilitate quite a few what may seem like very small conceptual changes, but actually these are massive shifts in terms of mindset and in terms of capability around this goal setting approach and how we facilitate that process. So really, by not approaching this as a change management process, we're not going to address the core issues that are going to stop us from people really embracing and adopting this new approach that we want. So look, when we do incorporate change management, we know this, like with projects, and I know that you're probably all familiar with prosci.com because, they're fantastic and they do a lot of corporate research in this space. But if you do incorporate change management principles, it really will increase your chance of success. And this example here, it really shows that direct correlation between effective change management. And what they also mention is it actually helps them stay on schedules and on budget. And projects that use these change management tools are 6 times more likely to meet objectives than those with poor change management. So here we have some tangible evidence. Applying change management, particularly with the people side of change, it's going to help your projects. When you're implementing this, absolutely start thinking about incorporating these principles. So now that we know we need to incorporate those principles, what are the biggest obstacles? So we acknowledge that performance management, needs a little bit of change management consideration. We need to keep incorporating those factors. But what are those pieces that we know from the change management research are going to be the biggest hurdles that we have to leap? I do not think this is going to surprise anybody. The top 5 factors that the ProSci Change Management Institute have told us about, and this is from the 2018 edition, are these. And number one, always number one, and I think we can all relate to this with any initiative, Lack of executive support and active sponsorship. This is always going to be the first hurdle, and it's absolutely where every implementation needs to begin. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. 2, inadequate change management buy-in and resourcing. So again, if we don't have that proactive approach, if we don't walk into this process going, I know this is change management and I need to approach this as change management, and we kind of, realize it on the hind foot, we're really not setting ourselves up for success. And sometimes with these kinds of initiatives, maybe we only have 1 or 2 chances before people are jaded and they're like, here we go, here's another initiative. We need to sustain that excitement and momentum by really trying to do this right. Obviously, there can be resistance and lack of support for the specific solution. So obviously, consultation, understanding what's going to work with your workforce. Different cultures are going to be at different phases of their change capability. So if you have a change-resistant culture or your organizational structure isn't set up for success, of course, this is going to impact your change process, something to consider as well. And then, of course, we know about change fatigue and change saturation. If there's 55 different projects going on at once, is this going to be the priority? Now, the good news with performance management is because of the clear business outcomes and the fact that this is designed to help people execute so that 1, they feel good about themselves, but 2, you elicit stronger business performance. Oftentimes, I don't see too much pushback from organizations around wanting to invest in performance management because it actually transcends just being a people and culture initiative. It's an organizational initiative. We're often working with chief operating officers as well. This is an operational excellence initiative as well. We are making our processes more effective, more efficient. We're making our people happier, but also more effective, more efficient, etc. Okay, so I think I've convinced you that this is a change management process, and we know what obstacles we need to address when we're looking at implementing a system. Where then do we actually start? And I've alluded to this already. Obviously, we can start looking at our change management frameworks. I think we're all familiar with these. There's plenty of them out there, and I've just popped a few up here as an example. Obviously, we have the ADKAR approach from the ProSci Institute. We have Kotter's 8 Stages of Change, Kurt Lewin. We've got frameworks upon frameworks upon frameworks upon frameworks within frameworks. I think change management is one of the biggest spaces that I've ever actually worked in. I'm not going to dive into any of these frameworks today. I'm going to pull out a couple of little pieces that we can actually use for performance management specifically. So the key pieces that I've learned from actually implementing these systems and what makes them successful. The first thing is you need a clear sense of purpose and direction. This is where that ecosystem comes into play. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Where is it that you see your organization going with this ecosystem? Really understanding what, that future state might look like from the very beginning. So really identifying, some milestones there for success so that you really have an understanding of when you've got there and you can celebrate those successes along the way. One of the things that I see, from my personal experience, I talk to clients all the time when they're looking at implementing software, and my role really is to understand more about, the behavioral piece, their processes, their programs, how we can support them in that space. Is, perhaps I'll be talking to someone, they're like, look, I'm not really sure why we're doing this. This technology looks great. My chief operating officer said that we need to do it. Or my CEO read a book on getting better at objectives. I Googled you and we decided that we're actually going to implement this software. The questions to come back with is, okay, but where did this come from? Because obviously, when they were looking at these, solutions, initially this executive perhaps that told you this or the conversation, where did that actually come from? What was the pain point that triggered that conversation in the first place? And if you're unsure of that piece, then we really need to clarify that step first. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be an idea. Okay, we want to get better at goal setting. We've tried a few different things. They're not working. Awesome. We can work with that. Have an idea of the purpose and the direction. Also think about it, whether this is the right time as well. Is this the right time to be implementing all of your ecosystem? Is this the right time to be implementing goal setting or feedback or values or technology or whatever it is? Is this the right time is a good question as well. I think I'm going to hammer this home a lot, but engage your people at every level. When you're doing this, you have to start with the executive team, that executive sponsorship. That's absolutely crucial. But have you also identified your project owners, your leads, your champions, anybody that's going to support you in that process? The middle managers in particular, are they engaged? Do you have an idea around how you're going to build their capability? Because at the end of the day, you're asking them to have more effective conversations on a more regular basis with their people. Communicate effectively. This is huge. I think this is where I see a lot of the implementations fall down, is that it's not a one-off email from an executive. It's looking at your different channels. Customizing to your culture, we've talked about. We absolutely need to do this. And then also with that purpose to direction, rounding that out with how are we going to sustain momentum along the way? Like I said, it's not a flavor of the month approach. It doesn't finish at the end of the year. How do we sustain momentum after those first few quarters of implementation? So let's dive in a little bit deeper to some of those pieces so that we can be a bit more concrete again. Engaging the executive when it comes to performance management, absolutely is the most important first step. So the ProSci Institute shows us time and time again, this is the number one factor. And I believe they said there's a 3-to-1 ratio of success if you engage your executive sponsors. So you are more likely by a lot to fail at this implementation if your executive aren't bought into the process, or at least you don't have a few sponsors at that executive table. I'm not saying that you always have to have that sponsorship first. I have seen organizations in very rare cases have a huge bottom-up movement where they're so motivated at the front line and so excited about goal setting, they've actually nudged the executive team into supporting a stronger performance ecosystem. But that was a really strong organizational culture and a very different organizational culture. I would say absolutely the majority of the time, you need to make sure that your executive are bought in. And I'll give you a concrete example of this. When I first came to Seven Geese, I was sent out on my first, what I would call rescue mission. And this was a client that was looking to leave us. They'd been with us for about 3 years now. And I'd actually done a post churn review. So I'd actually sat down with the client and said, talk me through, how your implementation went, what happened along the way. Where do you think it all went wrong? What could we have done just so that we could improve our services? And what actually emerged from this conversation was the fact with the implementation, many of these pieces, obviously they hadn't incorporated the change management principles. We hadn't partnered with them to do that. And when we looked at, in particular, what had happened, we really hadn't engaged the executive team. And so when I went back to this individual, I said, look, shall we go out, shall we have a session with your executive team and let's talk to them about, what they feel went wrong, how we can move forward. Perhaps we can talk about the performance management system, irrespective of whether they use our technology or not. So we went and held this executive team session. It was a 2-hour session. It was a conversation with their team about, strategic goal setting, what a performance ecosystem looks like, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the most amazing pieces was the fact that when we actually went around the table, the key reason every executive said that this hadn't actually worked over the last 3 years is because they all had a different idea of what this was meant to achieve. They didn't realize that this is what the performance ecosystem actually looks like. And one of the directors is like, oh my goodness, we've actually been doing it wrong this entire time. So once they actually understood the benefits and what they were doing, there was a few pieces there. There was a little bit of awareness. They weren't really sure of, why they were doing it in the first place. Perhaps it was an initiative started by one of them, but there also wasn't the capability there. They didn't understand what this was. They needed a few skills, a little bit of support. And sure enough, they came back on board. We drove their implementation and they've been much more successful ever since because the executive were able to drive that. I've seen this time and time again, and this is actually one of our key offerings now, is when customers come to us and they're buying our software, we often offer an executive either team session or one-on-one sessions to make sure that they really understand strategic goal setting, they understand the need for all those other factors like feedback recognition, etc., in the ecosystem to drive that goal attainment, because they need to set the example, they need to sponsor the initiative, they need to bring it up in the town halls and say, hey everybody, this is our progress, this is how we've gone against those company goals that we've been talking about that you are connected to. So this again is something that if you have resources and time, this is where you need to upfront spend most of your time, because absolutely this is going to be the make or break of your implementation. And it's really exciting because executives love the idea that you're actually helping people get more done with less, and they're happy about it because they have that sense of achievement as well. So we've again got that win-win situation, and there's a lot of tangible metrics you can show them around that to help them then go back to that, strategy to execution gap we were talking about. We want to help you execute on your strategy. We want to overcome these issues that we've seen in the past, and we're going to do this through an effective performance management system. And I guarantee you, majority of the time, they're going to be interested in what that looks like and what their role is in that process. One of the key pieces that you may find they may need support with at this level, particularly at the first stage, and this is something that I get called in to do a lot with our clients, is, okay, I love the idea of it. I'm bought into it now. I'm aware. I have an appetite. I'm really excited about this. I want our people to execute on this. But what we really need to figure out here is the fact that, we have to figure out that the executive team here need to understand how to translate their strategy into some key objectives and metrics as well. So look, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to forward through some of these little pieces as a high-level overview. So of course, we need to engage and equip our leaders at that top level to have the capability to have real performance conversations. So making sure that we factor this into our leadership development programs and set them parameters around their expectations. Identify your business champions. There's many of them, and they can help you with your implementation. And like I said before, plug and play doesn't work. Make this make sense for your organization as well. With communication, identify your existing channels, be clear about expectations, what they're expected to do, and keep those cadences and ongoing reinforcements in mind. So the progress and milestones that people need to achieve with this progress. So one of the pieces I want to leave you with as well is, when you're rolling this system out, please don't boil the ocean. Take this one step at a time. Don't just go straight to the software and automate it, because automation won't necessarily work. We need to make sure that, if you're building this ecosystem, perhaps start with goals, perhaps then build on that with the other pieces of the ecosystem. And then realize that when you bring in the technology to this piece, is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency, but automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. So I guess what I'm saying here is, absolutely, technology is going to be beautiful in nudging that behavior and supporting your systems, but just don't forget the people side of performance management in terms of both implementation and using change management, but also in supporting this with your technology as well. So in bringing it all together, I really do think continuous performance management is really worth the time and effort. You're going to get great results if you invest in this in a really strategic way. And I'm more than happy to talk to you further if you are interested in talking about the tips and tricks for success in more detail that we've talked about today. Obviously, there's so much that we can talk about on this topic, and it's absolutely massive, but we're more than happy to help. And look, if anybody is interested in talking to us or in seeing a demo of our platform as well, we've got a little poll question. And so if you would like to see us or speak to someone to dive into any of these topics in more detail, or want any more support around this process, please answer the poll and just let us know. We love talking about this stuff, and we'd love to support you. And look, if you have any questions that you've populated along the way, we'll absolutely do our best to follow up and get back to you. And it's been a pleasure talking with you all this morning.